The next speaker is going to be in English. She's a very long-term friend of mine, so I have to start with that. She's a distinguished specialist in environmental issues. She's passionate about issues of the environment. She works with an institution that deals with the environment, and she would like to share with you her concerns and even some solutions for preserving our environment. I give you Mrs. Alawiyya Jamal.
Thank you for the support. I need it. I'm taking you back to Earth. I'm talking about the environment. And environment is multifaceted. There's too many aspects of the environment, but I've only chosen one aspect, and those are the issues of indigenous knowledge. Sudan is an amazing country of culture, ecological diversity, and indigenous knowledge. We are also a blend of African, Arabs, and indigenous ethnic groups, something that has already been said by the previous speakers. Sudan is a Sahelian country. It falls under 5 ecological zones, and these 5 ecological zones with a special zone, which is the riverine zone, which should be given a special attention in my talk. The 5 ecological zones are deserts, ecological zones, semi-deserts, the short savanna, the tall savannas, and the montane and the riverine zones. Why have I taken indigenous knowledge as a topic? Indigenous knowledge has, as far back as the 1980s, has been the savior of population at the times of droughts and famines. Besides that, it's a subject that I think has not been, although recognized, it has not been very much popularized. And that is where I'm taking you. The first ecological zone here is the desert ecosystems. And you can see the desert ecosystems are not just a result of deforestation, wind erosion, and maybe human activities. The desert ecosystems are known to have very little rainfall. Very little rainfall. It is only populated by pastoralists. 13% of the pastoralists live in these very harsh conditions. They have, over time, managed to live in these conditions by understanding the ecosystems. The most famous of those are the Kababish. They travel all the way from the north of Darfur, and they come to the south, to the fertile areas. There are about 27 oases in the desert zone. They are not all inhabited. Just to give you an example, you will find Al-Nekhela and Salima, which are in North Darfur. You will find Al-Gab, which is in Dongola. And these areas, the Kababish would bring their herds from the north to the south, making use of or understanding the very lush grass that comes out not on a yearly basis, but it emerges periodically. What they do usually is they send out scouts to assess and gauge the pastures. Then they would start moving their herds, and mostly they are camels. They would also survive these hard conditions by planting or cultivating, actually, the goats and around the oasis. And usually it is the short, resistant quick growing crops like millet and sorghum. They usually, the people who move with the herds are the young ones, and they only live on camel milk for the season. The desert might look to most people as empty places. The desert are not empty, as the previous speaker said. It is full and it preserves our history. Just to give you a simple example from what you see on the slides in front of you is the temple, which is the Karma. Karma is a temple for worshipping Amun. And we had the Kush civilization and the Pharaoh civilization had common gods, and that is the god Amun. On this third slide, you would see the burial chamber of Kuruk, and that is in Karima. It's a burial chamber of a princess. The fourth slide at the bottom is that of Serge, which is in the made-up hills, and it is a continuous civilization from the Nile to Lake Chad. It just shows that the civilizations went from the extent of the Meroic civilization along that area. The fourth slide, my own interpretation is that these rock paintings are indicator of the kind of environment that existed at one time. And the environment at that time, I think they were quite a wetter environment. You can see that these are cattle, and cattle require daily waters. They're not like the sheep, which requires water every other day, or like the camel every 45 days. So to me, it's an indicator of a wetter climate. It just shows that we can be destructive. Human beings can be destructive. If I get you to the second ecological zone, which is actually, I'm going to merge the two zones together, the long savanna and the short savanna zones. You will see these are the short grass savanna zones, and these are the richest ecosystems we have in Sudan. They represent about 49% of the country. About 76% of the population live here, and I'll give you two examples how indigenous knowledge has made these, maintained these ecosystems. This is what the indigenous knowledge, how positive it is, how positive it can, the knowledge maintain our environment. And by the way, environment is not just, it's not a fallacy. It's an everyday issue that people should think about. Thank you. The example that I want to take is between in these ecological zones, two tribes live, they coexist peacefully in a very symbiotic relationship, and those are the Masariya Baggara and the Hamar Abbala. And from the word Baggara and Abbala, you will understand that one are cattle breeders, the other ones are camel breeders. And this is an interesting relationship. These people, again, they move from the north to the south axis, and here again the pasture is shared based on a cyclic rotation. The Masiriya, who are from southern western Kordofan, they would move from their dar or from their seat in Baba Nusa, and they will move into the northern part of their own territories, avoiding the swampy plains and the biting insects during the heavy rains. And they would graze their cattle further up. In the dry seasons, they would move north, and they will move north to the wetter grounds, and they will move towards Abyei. While what happens here is interesting. The Abala, who are usually herding their camel in the northern part, southern part, they will move north where the Messeria originally stayed to graze now, or to browse actually, the acacia and the compritum trees. So there is this symbiotic relationship between the two coexisting peacefully. The other example of this region, which is also very interesting, is that the native administration, they would meet in a place called Safaha, which is on the borders of Darfur and Kordofan, and this is again between the Rizegat and the Rizegat and the Maalia. Here, the Rizegat and the Maalia would come annually to meet together, again to assess the kind of pasture, their carrying capacity, and they would send out scouts to gauge this carrying capacity. They would look at the pasture, they would look at the water capacities, and then they would start moving within strict corridors, which have been there for centuries, for them to move into these areas. The thing is about the both types of examples I've been giving, they look at or they navigate their decision is based on the weather. It is the rain that they look at. And one example which is worth quoting is that in 1988, the Kababish saw a star in the sky, and they beat their nahas, their drums, their traditional drums, of a warning that there is a heavy rains for those, and it's a good season. And for others, it brought, of course, floods and miseries where they could not cope with too much of the rains. The other issue that I would like to move into is these systems work beautifully without the interventions of policies. Policies have to be well studied before any interventions should be taken. An example of the anti-SIRS campaign, an example of the mechanized farming, traditional mechanized farming. Those expand into these migration corridors, and they're always a cause of a conflict. And the conflicts are not something that is abstract for all of us. You can see it in Darfur, you can see it in the Blue Nile, and you can also see it in the new area of the borders between the two countries. If I'm allowed some time, I would want to go to the montane. Sorry if you can say the montane ecosystem. The montane ecosystem is interesting because it's also a scattered kind of ecosystem, and I will choose, for example, 4, and we'll start with Jabal Marra. Jabal Marra is an interesting. It receives around 1,000 milliliters of rain. It has about 2 crater rakes, 17 streams, and hot springs. It is the seat of the Sultanate that had not been in isolation from the rest of the country. It had relationship with the black sultanates of Sennar. It had a relationship with the Tunisians, and it had a relationship with the Mecca. People would remember that Mecca was it was sponsored by the Sultanate of Jabal Marra. Jabal Marra is also interesting because it has gallery forests. It's very rich in biodiversity. It is very rich in forestry, and it's also rich in the diversity of its foods. Here you will find that women all over Sudan, all over these ecological zones, are responsible for the household security. And these women, you would see that they grow their jubrakas in Darfur and their swebas in the Blue Nile, and of course the matmura in Gadarif. I'm asked to conclude my talk, and I would like to leave you with just a thought of that. We should think environment. There are individual responsibilities, and there are a collective responsibility. One collective responsibility should be that scientists and the communities should link together. We should link indigenous knowledge with science. We should look at how we can do a kind of a social contract with these communities, not encroaching on their properties, but how could there be a win-win situation? And the third is those for the private sector, which is also sponsoring this talk, is that cooperative social cooperative responsibility should not be a philanthropy. It should be something that is well-founded and well-integrated in our issues of development. Again, going green is not these individual responsibility. It's also cost-effective. Use, for example, lightsavers, lights. Recycle. Use al-guffa instead of the plastic. And with that, I leave you. Think environment, environment, and environment. Thank you.